Thank you so much for joining us on It's Time today. We are your hosts. I'm Linsly Donnelly, your citizen scientist and your longevity expert for midlife women.
And I'm Dr. Jen Wagner, physician and holistic performance expert. Welcome to It's Time, powered by Prosper. Welcome back to It's Time, everyone. We are so excited today to be joined by the absolutely amazing and talented Dr. Robin Smith and Gianna Jackson. And we are going to dive into Dr. Robin's story, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about a topic that we feel a lot but don't often talk about, which is trauma and grief. So just a little bit about Dr. Robin. I was so grateful to be connected to her through a mutual friend, and she has a long history as a therapist, as a speaker, as an author, so many things that she's going to share her story with. But really, this idea around grief and trauma and taking those experiences and translating them into something positive. And she and I have spent a lot of time talking behind the scenes about this. And so she's going to share her story with us, and she's going to share some of her wisdom with us and help us navigate these times where many of us are grieving lots of different situations in our lives. So welcome. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. I'm so grateful, Dr. Jen, who I consider to be a friend. And how we met was, don't take for granted when I meet women who are not only robust in their careers, but who are robust in their heart and spirit. So I'm really grateful for our connection and what you're seeding in the world. Have gotten to meet Linsly as well, and thrilled that Gianna is here as well. So it's a special time. And it's a special time because it's a tough time.
Yeah.
It's a tough time. And how we integrate, how we navigate, we delineate all of those, what it means to have sorrow and grief, and also our birthright to joy. Mm-hmm. And that's such a balance and sometimes we, only want one side of that coin, one side of the equation. I think about the cherry blossoms in DC. I'm in Philadelphia, but the Cherry Blossom Festival, people come from all over the world to see the cherry blossoms bloom. And it's a really short window. And people might say, gosh, I wish they were blooming all year long. And that's at times what we wish for our joy. Mm-hmm. We wish that our joy was always present and always triumphant. And that's not what happens in these human bodies of ours, and the fragility of being human and the resilience. We are both, two things can be true and are true about us at one time. So at the same time, I think what I'd like to say about me, about grief and sorrow and loss, and then I'll talk about joy, is that I have been personally acquainted with profound loss and grief. And sometimes when people hear me, they see me, they read my work, that either is missed, or even when people hear it, they see a package and it makes it hard for them to understand that I have suffered personally. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And profoundly suffered. Mm-hmm. My partner many years ago we were in remote Caribbean island, and we were talking, and we were with a different another couple. And he said, do you want to go for dinner? And I looked at my watch or looked at the, clock or whatever. And I saw his eyes roll back in his head. And this is something, Jen, that you yourself don't know. We haven't had enough time. Our stories, how my heart became tenderized has to do with that which fell apart. And so his eyes roll back in his head, and you are a physician, so you don't know what happened, but it was cardiac arrest. We were on a remote beach, which is fantastic unless you need help. Right. And we were, I went from being completely hysterical to quiet. Again, two things can be true. Right. Functioning and every piece of me, coming apart at the seams. And this is not before cell phones, but before cell phones became, unfortunately, joined at our hip. And so there happened to be someone on this beach who had a phone, and they were able to call for the ambulance, but there was no hospital on St. Martin. That's where we were at the time. There was a clinic, but not a hospital. They only had a handheld respirator, not a defibrillator. I mean, so this is major. And there's much to this story. I had to medevac him to Guadalupe and then back to Philadelphia. And he lived and died. And so he died on the beach and then was resuscitated with this handheld respirator. But I was, to say, unprepared for that moment in my young life. And then a few years later, I stopped working, lived in the hospital literally, and then he went to he had an anoxic brain injury. His brain, for those people who don't know, he looked fantastic, but he wasn't fantastic because his brain had been denied oxygen. And we made a journey together until he died again on Christmas Eve of that year. So I say that because that was a long time ago, and yet it was yesterday and it was forever ago. It was unreal and it is completely real. And so I think in this season that we are in this country and world, where regardless of how you vote or voted or wish you voted or would redo something, here we are. Here we are. And so there is this moment of how do we make space and room for that which hurts?
Right.
And can we be vibrant? Can we be, committed and passionate about one part of our life and aching in another? Do we have to choose sides? And, do I have to be just joyful or just full of grief and loss? So what I hope, even in our time together in this moment, is that we can do what I call write a permission slip, like from the principal, and that our time here with, the four of us who have gathered and all those who are, on the other side of the mic, that this is your invitation. I'm saying this to all of the listeners and all of the people who are tuning in and joining us, that this is my invitation, my personal invitation to show up for your own life and your whole heart with holes, HOLES, longing to be whole, WHOLE, which is a holy, HOLY journey. Yeah. So that's why I'm here. I know about holes. I know about the longing to be whole. And I know that it is a sacred and holy journey.
I love that framing of it, Dr. Robin, of the ability in this moment to be grieving for things other than an individual, right? To be grieving for values or grieving for cultural memories, and to be able to carry space with that loss with integrity and still build forward a path for light. And those two coexisting, I think, are really new, maybe for a lot of us, because, at least a lot of our cohort, this generation, hasn't had a lot of loss, right? Unless you've had individual loss. We haven't had cultural loss at scale that was systemic. And so we're feeling this idea of grief and sorrow and anger without an identity attached to it, not an individual. It's more character trait wise. So that toolkit or that invitation is such a gift that you offer for people to navigate and translate, what am I feeling and how do I go forward in parallel with joy and delight and in authenticity with disappointment and heartache and sorrow.
Yep, not that forced whiplash of making ourselves choose what side of the equation we're going to stand on. Instead of when they say don't straddle the fence, of course, humanity, we're all straddling. And now in this collective way, with COVID, which had its own profound and will continue to have its own profound shaping on us and of us. And then politically, I'm thinking today is the 5th anniversary of my mother's death. So she died right at the beginning and not from COVID, but there was so much terror and she lived an extraordinary life. And so what does that mean? And I know, Jen, you and I talked about the anniversary of your mother's death and transition and passing. And so what does that mean when we have both losses that are personal,
Mm-hmm.
Linsly, as you said, that are individual, and then we have these global cultural losses that maybe we didn't know that we can sit Shiva
Mm-hmm.
for those things too. We don't, it doesn't have to be a body. Pauline Boss, Dr. Pauline Boss, who is famous for her work on ambiguous loss.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what we're talking about, the ambiguity of loss when there is either not a body or there is a person who is still living. If we think about dementia and other ways in which
Yes.
someone begins to fade,
Mm-hmm.
but they're physically there. And so we still have a culture, we still have a country, we still have, we're still abiding here. And yet there is this feeling, this experience that I don't collectively, that we don't quite understand or recognize ourselves
Mm-hmm.
anymore as as a body, as a country. I mean, the division is so huge. And so, what I again hope is whoever is listening, whoever is showing up for this moment, that you invite yourself to your own table.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to the
Mm-hmm.
table of your own life, to the table of your own culture, to the aches and pains and the joys, and not force yourself to choose a side
Mm-hmm.
that either you go down the tubes or you have to always be happy and joyful. There's sometimes in not only the African American tradition in church, but people will ask, how are you? And someone might respond, I'm blessed and highly favored. And I think that's tremendous when I am blessed and highly favored. But
Yeah.
where is there room to say, I'm blessed because I'm here? I still have an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to figure out life, but I'm blessed and things are messy.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like as a nation, and as women in particular who we were conditioned to have things in order. And if
Mm-hmm.
we don't have them in order, that there is shame that comes with that. And so this is a reimagining of I can be blessed and I can be messy
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or heartbroken,
or
right? I
heart.
can be blessed
Absolutely.
and I'm heartbroken at the same
Absolutely.
moment.
I love that term ambiguous loss because I feel like a lot of the time I have right now ambiguous grief. And I can't even sometimes describe what I'm grieving because I don't have sophisticated enough language or even understanding to put it in a context. But I know I just carry this kind of sadness for myself, sadness for my daughters that are facing a world and challenges in that world that I haven't had to face, which I think is, that's not the way we predict life, right? Is that we are making it better for those that are coming behind us. And when you
Right.
see that not being kind of fighting that natural order of things, I guess that's probably like the one thing that I grieve most right now is that my daughters, and if my daughters choose to have children, their futures look very different than I would have imagined them a decade ago.
Mm-hmm.
And having to have these very different kinds of conversations with them about their personal values, their health, their access to different, whether it's medical care or mental health care, or what all of these different things that I thought I would never have to go back and have these conversations about. Now having to do that, I feel this ambiguous grief, and there's not a there's not like one thing I can target to say, this is why I'm grieving. And so
Mm-hmm.
it feels overwhelming. You could just feel smothered it and you're trying to find some joy and some happiness in these periods, but it's hard.
It is hard. It is hard. I think also, and that's why I mentioned Dr. Boss about ambiguous loss, because this is a time of ambiguous grief, that something's off. And I don't quite know what it is. And I don't know whether or not it's just me. Like, is it just me? And, when the world keeps moving and people seem to be doing or feeling more balanced than I am. And that's
Right.
why
Mm-hmm.
this venue to me is so essential that we came together.
Yeah.
And that's why the permission slip is so essential, that we can invite ourselves and that we can invite whoever hears this, witnesses this, to have the permission to feel off a bit and not alone. There's something about the isolation of being off and alone that is unbearable, that can feel unbearable. And so, when there has been a physical death, and the world keeps moving and people often don't want to say, I don't have pleasure the way I had pleasure before, or something is missing, or food doesn't taste as good. They're the things I used to do, the music that used to uplift me. I mean, I still love that song, I still feel it, but something's gone. And I don't know, like, will it ever come back?
Mm-hmm.
Will I ever feel vibrant and intact again? And a piece of what we are doing, I feel in this moment, is creating community so that people know they are not alone. And that we know, and I know, let me personalize this, that in this moment, I am not alone. Yeah.
One thing that feels really paramount in that is when you grieve for an individual, I mean, cerebrally, you understand they've passed and they've moved on. And one of the things that's hard in this idea of grieving for values or culture or what we believe to be true is it's hard to say it's past, but you don't actually want actually to go through the grief process because then you're saying it's actually gone.
Hmm.
And that is different to figure out where do you then build on hope or where do you build on it's not that the potential is gone. Do I reframe this as there's a new way to build this value or this cultural norm that I thought was a given and no longer is, or those things that conceptually it's almost harder to explicitly grieve for them because you kind of don't want to let them go, right? Like they're threatened, but are they really gone? Like a human passes and we've rationalized spiritual connection to that human after the fact. But things are so core to our value set, it's hard to really go through that grief process because that letting go is terrifying.
Linsly, that's so urgent, like what you just brought up. And it reminds me of when I have worked with couples and there has been a breach of trust in their union. And that doesn't always mean people immediately think affair, but we're not here to talk about the many forms of a breach, because sometimes choosing work, not just with men, but women, I mean, choosing children. I mean, there are lots of ways to be unfaithful to a commitment and covenant that are not about romantic or sexual
Right.
you know, other connections. But I love that what you're bringing up, because when I'm working with people and they will say, it's never going to be like it was. And I'm like, you're right. It's not ever going to be like it was. It might be better,
Mm-hmm.
but it will be different. It could be worse too, but it will be
Right.
different. And so there is something in all of us. We have a great meal. And I know for me, like, I want to go back and I want that meal.
Yeah.
I want it to
Yes.
taste the same, even if my taste buds are different. I want that exact precise meal. And I'm like, I think they didn't put as much dressing, or it's more, or because I'm looking to actually create the past in this present moment. And then I want to carry it, into the future. And so
Yeah.
what you're talking about is right. Can I say, actually, the world as I knew it, the culture, my values as I knew them, that is not returning. And let me tell you why it's not returning, because I'm not the same. So even if everything comes back
Mm-hmm.
exactly as it was, I have been changed from the loss. I've been changed from COVID. Now,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean bad. Jen, you were just talking about this. I mean, what the conversation you thought you would never have with your daughters.
Mm-hmm.
So there is something about talking with our children or grandchildren or friends about things that we simply didn't imagine. I can't imagine that there are many things around race and gender and ethnicity as a
Yeah.
Black woman. I mean, I am quite aware that we had a long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say this, and as I said, my mother died 5 years ago. Never, did I think that I would be navigating and pondering things that my parents were older parents at that time. They were in their 40s, which now is not when they had me. And my siblings are 11 years older, twins. But I'm like, what country am I in? What world am I in? And like where
Yeah.
meanness is nurtured.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
sometimes we used to be able to, Warren Buffett says to, I think he told Bono, to accuse people, and these are my words, but of their virtue. Like acute,
Mhm.
because we think of accusation is, like, but like that we could bring out those better angels.
Right.
And now we're like, well, wait, I'm not sure. Mr. Rogers said, look for the helpers. And it's like, wait a minute, somehow we don't seem to value helpers, sweetness, gentleness. And so I think it's really important what you brought up, that we can't return to what was. But this is, again, the great, exciting news. We can build something valuable and meaningful, but it will be different. And that's
Mhm.
where the grief comes in. It will be different. And if we can let ourselves, as women, our bodies change. I mean, I look at my body and I feel my body, and I'm sometimes grateful for it and sometimes critical of it because it is different
Mhm.
Yes.
in certain ways. It is more resilient. But if I look back, I'm trying to get that old me, that old marriage, that old image, that old meal, whatever it is that we have romanticized. And it doesn't mean that it wasn't incredible then, but this is now, not then. And so I really welcome for us to invite everyone to consider it's okay to miss what was. It's okay to think like, I didn't think I would ever be talking to my children about this, Jen, as you said. And
Mhm.
I'm sad.
Mhm.
I'm like sad that I don't know what future
Right.
Mhm.
I'm cultivating and offering them. And so if we can make room, I mean, pull a chair out like you would for a guest who you really like,
Mhm.
and invite my grief to sit at the table and dine
Mhm.
and wine.
Yeah.
Do you think, I try to say to myself, Linsly and I talk about this all the time. We have to move forward. There's no alternative, right? We have to move forward, and we are all going through loss and grief at different stages. I recently lost my mom permanently. I felt like I lost her. Some of the connectivity was a gradual decline over years. Linsly's actively going through this with her mother right now, who she has not lost permanently, thankfully, but this, even the
Grieving
loss of the relationship that you've had
Yeah.
and those changing dynamics.
Mhm.
And then when we look at this more ambiguous loss and grief, and do you think there's a place for, I'm going to use the word ritual, that may not be right, but some sort of, I almost feel like I need closure around some of these things to be able to move past them, Linsly. Like you
Mm.
said,
That's a great
to
question. Yeah.
acknowledge it's happened, to say, we're not going back. We have to move ahead. So, how do I close this chapter so I can move ahead? So I'm not holding on to this last little filament of, I don't want to use the word hope because that's not really what it is, but this last little filament that things are going to go back to the way they
Yeah.
were, when that's not going to
And
happen. So,
nostalgia. It's like you're holding that nostalgia, like that's gonna be
yeah,
real.
how do we let go of that to
Yeah.
be able to move into this new realm? Some of this has affected, like obviously the passing of my mom has affected my family, but this ambiguous grief has affected my family in very impactful ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggle with, like, and I know my family members listen to this and we've had these conversations. We have different ideas. And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean I don't love them. That doesn't mean I don't value them as my family. I love their children, but we do have differences. And so I want to be able to put some of my frustration with that aside and be able to move forward.
Yeah. So, and it's an interesting word about put it aside and kind of be done with it.
Right. Because I can't.
No, it
And
always
so,
coexists.
so
Yeah.
maybe it's less about being done with it and letting it have its own place to live. Because, see, I think the energy behind, I want to kind of finish this,
Mm-hmm.
can be an illusion in and of itself.
Okay. No,
And
I
so
mean,
so what would it mean to keep moving with it not so neatly bowed? What does it mean to have some strange feeling
mhm.
about the unfinishedness of something, and yet to cultivate joy and purpose and meaning, and that it might pop up and then it does what it does, it pops up, and which is very different than I'm going to, like, there is a beginning, a middle, and an end,
Right.
Mhm.
in terms of grief, that there is, and how one can we make room for how you do grief and how I do grief. And I said to
Mhm.
my sister, again, my brother and sister are twins, and this is something else that is probably not known, meaning by you, but my brother suddenly died 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. Again, this is my sister, and they're twins, and they shared the womb together, and 11 years before I came, like, so life was happening. Then I show up later. He had traveled, gone with friends to Paris, came back, was great, and then 10 days later had a cardiac episode and was gone. But I say that because I will say to my sister, like, this is how this feels so unfinished in certain ways. There is a part of me that is closer to him, because his life was he had a big life and a big person, and um, big joy and big problems. And I'll say, well, what's this like for you? And how she navigates it as his twin is very, very different than how I navigated. And so if I need her to be like me, or she needs me, so that we can maybe affirm that one of us is right in how we've done this. And so I'm just wondering, what does it look like to have a process that lets your loss and my loss and Linsly's loss and Gianna's loss, all of our losses, in a way that it changes, but it's never over.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very different experience, that
Mhm.
it changes. And it may even be that what feels so intense now, I listen to people talk about, you're going to feel this way. We don't know how somebody else is going to feel. We don't know how we're going to feel. And that we sometimes will want to prescribe and ascribe a particular experience to loss, when, like every other living, and this is what I want to say, loss is a living organism.
Mhm.
So even though there may be death to values, or death to culture, or death to a person, my is living. It's changing.
Yeah.
It
Mhm.
changes with me, and I change with it. And I can drive by a cleaners that I drive by all the time and feel nothing. And then my father died 35 years ago, and I can feel an ache for him in a way that I'm like, okay, but I pass that dry cleaners all the time, and I don't feel anything, and now all of a sudden I'm tearful. So I guess I'm inviting us to, like bread dough, I mean, to knead in the grief that we have, and not force ourselves to feel or not feel. This is the other part of grief. I mean, maybe I'm good and someone thinks like I should feel more devastated. I mean, like something's like off. And then I'm thinking, maybe there is something off. Maybe I don't know, like they seem to think that I should feel differently than I feel. So this is, again, the permission slip. Can I just make room to feel what I feel and to not feel what I don't feel?
Mhm.
I love that point, because I know I struggled with that after my mom died. Am I sad enough? Am I, and if I was doing something that brought me joy, was that discounting what I had just gone through and discounting her life by finding joy other places? I struggled with that a lot. Like, is it okay to be with my dad and my brother and we're laughing and having fun about something that's totally disconnected to her? Is that okay? Are we, that took a long time for me to not even rationalize, but sit with and say, Yeah, it is okay. And so I would love to kind of use that as a transition point a little bit to, I also think it's hard, we live, regardless of what side you're on, regardless of your viewpoint, we live in a very divisive world where all of a sudden we don't like certain people because of things that used to never even be issues, right? And it's so heavy sometimes, and we need to find the joy, but sometimes I feel like it is hard, or we feel like we don't give ourselves permission to find the joy, celebrate the joy. How do we move when we live in this world of kind of constant negative barrage? How do we find the joy and embrace that and bring that a seat at the table as well, and recognize the importance and share that importance, especially in the face of those questions of you're not taking life seriously enough if you're finding joy, you're not grieving properly if you're finding joy, all of these other messaging that is sent to us.
But your journey with your mother,
Yes.
because that's, again, it's a living journey as her journey is
Yes.
shifting,
Yes. Yes.
as her journey is shifting.
Yes.
And so what does it mean? Am I disloyal if I laugh? Am I disloyal if I fantasize about a vacation when I have a parent who is what I call dialing back?
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yes. Yeah. Or, just the idea of having, when my brother and I were talking it through, it was like, it's okay to grieve for the mother we remember, and the mother whose memories bring us so much joy and comfort, even though this other person with whom we're compassionate is not embodying that memory. And
Yes.
even that she's breathing, right? It's not that she has passed. It's okay to have that grief moment right now, because that transition is a grief. And
Absolutely. I mean,
that
and
step is
it's a
part of it.
loss. I mean, it is.
Yes.
I remember the Mother's Day before, my mother died, and I didn't know she was dying, and yet I did know. When you
Yeah.
don't know, but
Yes, you do.
whatever
Yeah.
that means.
Yes.
And so I was
Yes.
jogging over to her house and just weeping. I mean, sobbing, crying, as if she was gone, because she was gone, even though she was talking and intact and had a big dinner and all these other things and still in her own house. And
Yes. Yeah.
but that doesn't, I mean, that's it plays well. I mean, that can, but the mother who I knew was again fading,
hmm
I had profound grief. And I remember thinking, I didn't know what would happen when she did die, and I didn't know she was going to die so quickly after that. But those tears were like necessary.
Yes.
They were right. Absolutely. And they were necessary for the journey that was going to be ahead of me, not only when she was physically gone, but when I was still here. See, that's a part of what we're talking about. Like our loved one, whoever they are, or our values, or our country, Jen, as you were talking about the divisiveness. How do I understand the power and what I would call is our divine birthright, however one understands that, to joy? It's our birthright. Grief is our birthright, and so is joy. And so when I think of what it means to have joy have its own seat at our table, and how do we make space and room for our joy? And do we understand? I just gave a keynote that joy and self care are actually part of good leadership
Mhm.
skills for running a company. And, it could feel like, oh, that's the soft data. That's the like joy. I mean, talk to me about the numbers. And I'm like, you want to know about your numbers? Let me talk to you about your joy.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to know about how to build your business, then you want to talk to me about your self-care and your joy, because joy is it's the fuel
Mhm.
that allows us to take all the other kind of pieces, all the shattered and broken pieces, and convert them. And Jen, you were saying this at the beginning. One of the things that I work with companies and Fortune 100 and individuals and organizations is how to take what's broken and use it.
Yeah.
I call that redemption, not spiritually, not, sent, but it's redemption. It is like taking something that would be discardable and like go in your recycle bin, the stuff that you like we're ashamed of, the things that we didn't want to own happen to us or something that we did to someone else, and realize that those broken, shattered pieces are grief and the things that are failures and again, failure to me is only failure if we don't understand that it's feedback. It's just life giving us information. It's just life giving us information. And so the joy is its essential fuel to make the journey. To say we love people and to say goodbye to people, we need our joy so that life has that redemptive quality and that redemptive essence when things fall apart, because they will.
Mm-hmm.
Because they
Yes.
will. And then our joy will
Yeah.
remind us that there is more to our story.
Yeah.
So powerful.
So powerful. And it's so important to hear it again and again and again, because it is easy. And I think we've all gotten accustomed and comfortable to sitting in this negativity and grief and loss and hopelessness. Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Hopelessness. Like, I can't do anything. What can I do if people hate each other? You can decide. I always say, whoever owns your thoughts owns you. And so if we begin to think about, well, okay, so maybe people do hate each other, but I have a choice. I can choose. I have a free product called Choose Differently. And it's all about the power of choice, that we
Yes.
can choose differently. So, yeah, the neighbors and the people at the mosque or the synagogue or the church, I mean, yeah, but that doesn't have to be my choice. I can choose differently. And so instead of feeling disempowered,
Mm-hmm.
I can actually think, well, I can't change the world, but I can do something in my house.
Mm-hmm.
And I can do something in my mind. I can do something at my table about what I am doing and whether or not I'm making room for my sorrow, my exhaustion. Exhaustion is something, and again, with women, because we just, can flash that badge, that says like I'm exhausted, and people say, "Oh, I know, like me too." And I'm thinking, well, how about if maybe that flashing that card is like, well, but you can choose to not live on fumes. You can choose to not call crumbs a meal. You can
Mm-hmm.
choose that joy is what you're going to cultivate, because again, whatever it is we focus on is what grows.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I think that is just, again, so important. I'm reflecting when we have these conversations, I reflect a lot kind of on my life and what things are going on. And I just love that idea of, regardless of who I'm with, bringing that attitude and temperament to the table. I literally have this visual of every time I go to sit at a table, there's a chair on either side of me, and one's my grief and one's my joy, and they're going to come with me. And
Yes.
that's just part of it.
And Dr. Jen, let's remember this. They're going to come with you and they're going to come with me. But whether or not I give one more room, more airtime,
Mm-hmm.
and who else is at my table? That's the other thing. I mean, if my sister is at my table, we just had a conversation recently, and we see the world differently. We see parenting and her grandparenting and very differently. And so I want to invite us, and this is again what I practice in my own life, to decide who is in my ear. Who am I letting get close to me? And if people drain me, like I always say that caller ID, I think, was like, God's invention or the higher power, however one understands that. But we don't use it enough. It's like, oh, that's my so-and-so calling. I have to answer it. I'm like, maybe you should think about whether or not this is the right time.
Yes.
Whether or not this is the right moment. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe
Yes.
5 minutes later, or maybe after dinner.
Yeah.
If you know this person is draining and they're like always on that negative, like the world is coming to an end, you might think, well, I'm already tapped out. So it's probably not good self-care for me to answer that call or respond right now. I can do it later. But how do we learn to self-protect? And I wanted to just tell you this story about my mother. My grandmother lived to be 108 and a half. So my mother lived to be 98 and a half. And so she was sure that she had 10 more years because her mother lived to be 108 and a half. So when she turned 98, everyone said, oh, you've got 10. She was like, absolutely. She had 10 years. And then a couple of months later, she was again very quietly and peacefully gone. My grandmother, I said to my mother, I said, Mommy, let me say something really very clear to you. And this is, my grandmother was living, and my aunt and my mother were these accomplished women who were running around trying to prove something to their mother, who was very hard to please. Now, let me just say this. My mother's been gone 5 years. She is mortified in whatever form she is in right now that I just didn't get the memo. She just doesn't know whose kid I am. That I tell. So I would give, speeches, and I'd say, my mother's having like a heart pain right now. And people would look, and I said, no, 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 she's fine. She just knows that I've been up long enough to tell you guys that I'm not perfect. She's not perfect. We're not perfect. And that's not what she wants on the street. She just wants that bio out there, not the rest of this. But I said to her, I said, Mommy, let me say something. What you and my aunt, her sister, are doing with grandmommy, I can tell you now, I'm not doing it. You can fail me, give me an F as a daughter, because I can tell you now, if this is what is going to happen, like in my old years, and my mother would have been like probably 70 at that point, and her mother in her 90s. I said, like, just give me an F now, because I'm not right. I'm not doing it. And she laughed, but I understood that to watch my mother, older, and her sister running around trying to get the crown of being a good daughter when they had been remarkable to their mother. And my grandmother was the daughter of a freed slave. She was tough. She had survived a lot. Her father survived, and her parents survived a lot. But that wasn't a reason. And this is what I want people to understand. I can understand how my grandmother became who she became, and I can even honor it. And I did honor her, but understanding it doesn't mean that I'm going to excuse it. Mm-hmm. And that's what when we're talking about how to navigate our loss and our grief, or someone else's sense of our loss and our grief, we might understand that someone wants us to do it their way. Mm-hmm. And we could understand why they might want that. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to indulge it and do it.
Yes. Yeah.
Such strong advice. Okay, Dr. Robin, where do people find you?
My website is drrobinsmith.com, and that's DRROBINSMITH.com. So people can find me at drrobinsmith.com. Also on all the socials, so Instagram, LinkedIn, all social media at Dr. Robin L. Smith. And there are these free offers that I mentioned, Choose Differently. People can go to my website and opt in for the newsletter to become part of the community, or they can go to Dr. Robin Smith /choose and get their copy of Choose Differently, which is a free offering. And there's some other free offerings there as well. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys both for taking the time to talk with us about such a complicated topic. This is the first of hopefully many conversations, because I feel like we scratched the surface, and I'm going to go and come back with like 6 million questions by tomorrow as my head is spinning. Linz, anything you want to add?
Well, I super appreciate it. And also, I think there were some really tangible ideas for people, because this idea of grief can seem really abstract. And I love the conceptualizing of grief can coexist with joy, and it can be with you for your lifetime. It's not something you need to get over or shed or let go of. And grief can be the foundational building block for the better vision you have if you're grieving these concepts or cultural or community heartaches, that can be the catalyst and help you architect what you want to shape that might survive and thrive longer than what it is we've let go of. So I love that message of light and hope that's practical for people to digest.
No, it's great. And I do want to, just as you said, that remind us of two things. One, that sometimes we convert grief into guilt. Mm-hmm. And I want us to be careful about that. That, I feel so guilty that I'm not doing this for my husband, kids, mother, father, the community, saving the world, whatever it is. And sometimes it's really not that we are guilty. It's that we have come up against our limitations of being one human being.
Mm.
And that's where we can grieve. Like, I'd love to do more, but I can't. So the question, it's not mine to do everything. So just that we tease out the difference, that sometimes what we are calling guilt is more about grief. Grief about what is, grief about what isn't. So just to share that. And then the last thing is just be kind to yourself. I mean, that's really, I mean, if someone said, like, what's the medicine? What's the medicine for grief? And it's self-compassion. And then we can, from the overflow of our self-compassion, we can share with others. We can be compassionate and more tolerant, even for people who we don't like. So we're allowed to not like people. We don't have to like everyone. We don't have to. But there's a difference in, if I have been tender with myself, I can be very different with people who I don't particularly like, or don't, appreciate how they treat me or treat someone else, but how I show up with them is very different when I have been good to me.
That's a very strong and important point. And I think we see that in so many aspects of life, right? And what we talk about so much is this self-care. And I think we sometimes maybe don't emphasize how we talk to ourselves and treat ourselves. We talk about, are we sleeping? Are we fueling correctly? Are we moving our bodies? Are we connecting with others? But really, have we given ourselves some grace and been kind to ourselves, which most of us are not?
We're not. I mean, the word, slander, that we talk about slandering someone else, but I always check in with myself. Have I slandered my own name today? Have I slandered my body? Have I slandered my thoughts? Have I been mean to myself? And maybe I screwed up. It's okay. I mean, I screw up. But then how do I treat myself when I become aware that I made a mistake, or that my patience was not patient? Yeah. And so I just want to remind us that Mary Poppins, a spoonful of sugar, helps the medicine go down. And so we need some sugar. We need some sweetness.
Yeah.
From whom all wisdom springs, Mary Poppins.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
That's right. Yeah, that's it.
Well, I would just like to, on behalf of those who were fortunate enough to listen to this conversation, thank you so much. I feel it was a healing conversation. It was a thoughtful conversation. It was a meaningful conversation. It was a practical conversation. And most importantly, what made me feel healed is that it was a safe place to even have the conversation. We can't even have the real conversation. We can get on social media and have our point of view or use our little code words, but we can never talk about it as grief, as ambiguity, you just hit on such an important theme for so many of my friends, so many people that I just interact with, and we all feel it, but we don't have the space to talk about it or even hear others talk about it. So thank you for that. And I hope there are more conversations that I get to hear, be a part of, celebrate, share, all of that. It was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Gianna.
Joining us. And thanks everyone for tuning in and listening with us, and more to come. Like I said, we're just getting started. There's so much here. And Dr. Robin, thank you for imparting your wisdom, helping us learn how to create space, John, to have these conversations, to feel safe having these conversations, and to learn how to bring brightness into what is kind of, for many people, a really dark time for lots of different reasons. So thank you guys. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us here today. If you liked what you heard and you got some tips on how to live better right now and for the long haul, please help us reach more midlife women. Please share and rate and like this show. And we can't wait to continue the dialogue with you on our next episode. Until then, thank you. It's time.